Welcome back everyone. We've glued up our boards to make them 500 millimeters wide. I've gone and scraped off a lot of the glue on this one already, and I'm now going to run them through the thicknesser just to clean them up, make them nice and flat and smooth. It's really important when you do this, you don't want to take off too much material. So the boards should be at 19 mil thick at the moment, but we want to try to keep them as thick as possible in the long run. So that's why it's important to try to scrape off as much glue as you can to start with. I'm going to take off maybe 0.5 millimeter at a time on each side, and hopefully that will be enough. Alright, from here I can now take it over to the table saw and get those pieces cut into our 4 different components, ready to do some routering and glue up our box carcass construction. Alrighty, here I am at the table saw, and I've also brought with me those 3 pieces that we had left over from when we cut them off to start with. They're all 400 millimeters long, because while I'm here I'm going to cut these down to 42 millimeters wide each, and we'll end up with 7 pieces at 42 millimeters wide. For our board, I'm going to cut 181 millimeters, 500, 181 and 500 again. Remember, we talked about how we want the grain to be able to wrap around the whole carcass. I'll be able to get back down now and get ready to router our rebates, and then we'll be able to put it together. Alright, so what I've done is I laid all my material out and I made sure that all of the grain matched the way that it was when it was all one board. I then went and labelled each of the pieces along the joins with AA, BB, CC, etc. And then there was a D down that end and a D down that end, because it's going to wrap back around onto itself. I had a good look at both sides of the material and the grain, and I found that there was a little bit of a chunk taken out from the thicknesser on one of the pieces. So I decided that that piece would be best to be positioned as the inside of the top piece. That way you're not really going to be able to see it when the material is all glued up together. So that's a good tip for you to do when you're sort of looking to see which piece should go where. Make sure that the nicest piece of grain is going to be at the top. Okay. Now what I've done is I've just gone and checked on the router what the distance from the router cutter to the edge is, so that I can set up a fence. Now I think for you guys we will end up making a jig to make this a little bit more clear cut for you, so that you don't need to set up a temporary fence each time. But I'm going to use the router to go and router that rebate joint along the edge. It's going to go on the inside of the 2 long pieces. So the 2 pieces that you've made at 500, it's going to go on the inside of that. I measured that distance and it was 71. So I've added about 18 millimeters on top of that, because my material is now about 18 millimeters thick, and that should give me an 18 millimeter rebate, and I've adjusted the cutter depth to be 9 millimeters deep as well. So hopefully, all going well, it should give me a perfect rebate joint. I'm going to do the first one now, and then I'll do the others off camera and show you the completed product after I've done them all. Remember, the router's a really noisy machine, so make sure you're wearing earmuffs and safety glasses. Alright, so a couple of things there, guys. You might have noticed that I went back and forth a whole bunch of times. What I was doing, I was just sort of skimming the surface each time because I didn't want to overly labour the cutter or the machine. So by doing it in several passes, it just makes for a nicer cut. You also might notice down here that there's been some chips blown out the edge. I'm going to try to glue those pieces back in, so I don't want to rip them off or snap them off. I want to try to keep them. I'm going to try to glue them, put some tape around them, and that way it should end up with a nice finish at the end. I'm going to unpack this one and then go and do the other 3 joints. So I've got all the rebates cut, the 4 rebates on the 2 long pieces, all done now, and I've already sort of pressed them together just to check to make sure that the rebates are the right sort of depth and width, and they're all good to go. So I've laid them out in the same order that they were when they were all one big board, remembering that I had previously labelled the parts AA, BB at the joints so that I know which way they go together. So what we can then do is we can start standing all of these pieces up, and I've gone and put some marks to represent the inside as well on these side panels, just to make sure that I've got them in the right spot, and making sure that we keep all of that order correct. Alright, now that's how it's going to go together. So this is just a little bit of a dry run to make sure that it's all going together correctly, and I've got my clamps ready to go. Now when I go to glue this, I'm going to clamp it all up, and then before I walk away and leave it to dry, this part's really, really important. You need to measure the diagonals, okay, to make sure that your job is square. If one of your diagonal lengths is 1 millimeter or 2 longer than the other one, then that tells you that your box, your carcass construction, is not square. Alright? It'll take a little bit of stuffing around to get this right, so I'll go and get that ready and I'll show you what it looks like with all the clamps on afterwards. This one was quite a process. It was relatively easy handling all of the materials. I put the glue on all the rebates, pieced it all together, and then just slowly put some clamps on. When I put the clamps on that I felt like I needed, I then measured the diagonals on both sides. Now on this front side, it worked out pretty well perfectly. It was pretty well spot on the same, both diagonals, indicating that that side was all square. This side was a little bit more of an issue, and I'm not sure why. It might just be something to do with the way that the material was cupping or wanting to pull, or maybe it was something to do with the amount of compression in some of the clamps. But by putting on a few more clamps, I've been able to pull it into square on both sides now. So now I just need to wait a minimum of 24 hours for it to dry before taking any of the clamps off. In our next video, I'll be looking at the legs, and remember, you don't have to do all of this in this order. You can shuffle around your order if other people are using tools or clamps or things like that. So you might like to get onto your legs before gluing this up, or do this part first. It doesn't really matter.